In classical macroeconomics, the quantity theory of money establishes a direct relationship between the amount of currency in circulation and the price of goods. If a central bank expands the money supply, the theory dictates that all prices will eventually rise by a proportional amount. This leads to the concept of long-run neutrality. Printing money does not construct new factories, it does not generate new labor, and it does not permanently increase the structural output of an economy. Over a long enough timeline, the real wealth of a nation remains unchanged by the money supply. But an economy does not instantly leap into the long run. When new money is created, it enters the economy at a specific point, creating a shockwave that takes time to permeate the system. New money does not reach everyone at the same time. It moves sequentially through transactions, passed from one participant to another as they trade goods and services. While the money is traveling, it creates a temporary imbalance. The initial recipients suddenly hold more purchasing power, allowing them to bid resources away from those who have not yet received the new currency. Because money travels sequentially, the point of injection acts as an epicenter. It determines who is able to spend at lower prices before the inflation wave catches up to them, and who is left to face higher prices with their old income. The 18th century economist Richard Cantillon was the first to document this mechanism. Observing the influx of new gold and silver arriving from the Americas, Cantillon noted that the wealth rippled unevenly through European markets, rewarding mine owners and early merchants, while punishing property owners and fixed-wage earners. Modern new Keynesian frameworks often attribute short-term economic disruptions to sticky prices, the idea that businesses are slow to update menus or renegotiate staggered contracts. Cantillon's observation points to a different mechanical friction. In 2012, economists Cheng and Angus modeled this friction for modern deficit spending. Their core argument: money has short-term real effects not because sellers refuse to change prices, but because money itself is sticky. It physically takes time to reach every market participant. We are going to trace a single one-off deficit spending injection through the dynamic model Cheng and Angus built. By mapping the exact flow of funds, we can watch how the sequential arrival of new money physically warps the structure of an economy before nominal prices finally catch up. To understand the distortion, we first have to build the economy in its steady state, period zero, where supply and demand are perfectly balanced. This economy is driven by two distinct groups of agents: workers who supply labor and spend their wages on consumption, and savers who supply capital and deposit their money in banks to earn interest. The production side of the economy is divided into three interconnected sectors, labeled X, Y, and K. Sector X represents a simple consumer good. It requires only one input to produce: labor. Sector K is an intermediate capital good. Like Sector X, it is produced using only labor. Sector Y is a complex consumer good. It requires a specific combination of inputs, both labor and the intermediate capital good, K. Here is the critical constraint in the model: production takes time. The intermediate good K required by Sector Y today must have been physically produced in the previous period. To facilitate all this production, savers deposit their money in a bank. The bank acts as a non-profit intermediary, lending that pool of credit to the producers so they can purchase their inputs before selling their finished goods. Because the intermediate goods required for today's production had to be built yesterday, this economy operates with a strict physical limit. No matter how much money enters the system, real output cannot respond instantly to a sudden spike in demand. We advance the simulation clock to period 1. The government prints new money to fund deficit spending and hands it directly to the savers. They immediately deposit this new cash into the bank. The bank suddenly holds an expanded pool of credit. Following their standard operating procedure, they immediately lend this larger pool of money out to the producers in sectors X, Y, and K. The model assumes that labor costs for this first period are governed by pre-existing wage contracts. Because these agreements were signed before the injection occurred, the wage rate remains fixed at its period zero level, even as producers find themselves flush with new credit. Producers now have more credit, but their labor costs are unchanged. Seeking to expand, they aggressively bid against each other for the other available resource, the intermediate good K. Its price spikes immediately. But Sector Y hits a supply chain bottleneck. Despite the surge in available credit, Sector Y cannot increase its output. It is strictly capped by the physical amount of good K that was produced back in period 0. Finding sector Y capped, the excess consumer demand spills over. Available labor shifts rapidly away from producing new capital goods, moving instead into sector X to mass-produce the simpler consumer good. In the immediate aftermath of the injection, the structural timeline dictates the outcome. Intermediate prices rise sharply, real savings drop as capital production is abandoned, and the economy's labor force skews heavily towards simple consumer goods. Now we advance to period 2. The temporary wage contracts expire, wages unfreeze, and immediately spike upward to catch up with the expanded money supply circulating in the system. Producers pass these higher labor costs directly to the market, driving up the final prices of both consumer goods X and Y. While final goods prices are climbing, the intermediate good K available for purchase right now was physically produced back in period 1. Because its production costs were settled during that initial window of fixed wages, its price falls relative to the consumption goods. Reacting to these distorted price signals, the labor force reverses course. Workers abandon the consumer goods sectors to mass produce the now relatively cheaper intermediate good K. We step into period 3. The total pool of bank credit remains identical to period 2, but producers now require more money to pay for the massive stockpile of intermediate good K they just ordered. To balance the ledger, wages are forced back down. This oscillating whiplash is mathematically unavoidable in the author's derivations. Because of the sequence of the money flow, wages rise in period 2, fall in period 3, rise in period 4, and continue to alternate. Because physical production takes time, the economy is constantly chasing an outdated target. Producers overcorrect to old price signals, trapping real output and labor allocation in a severe, alternating whiplash. If the economy becomes trapped in an overcorrection loop, how long does this instability last before the system finally clears the mismatch? To map the exact length of the long-term horizon, Chang and Angus ran a series of numerical simulations in MATLAB. This chart displays the simulated trajectory of the real variables, the actual physical output of goods X, Y, and K. The high-amplitude waves slowly lose their energy, taking between 8 and 12 periods to decay completely flat, returning output to its exact original baseline. However, the nominal variables, the wages and prices, behave differently. They also oscillate and decay, but their waves settle onto a permanently higher plateau. In the base case simulation, a 10% monetary injection results in a nominal plateau that settles exactly 10% higher than where it started. The simulation confirms the baseline macroeconomic principle. In the long run, the quantity theory of money holds true, and money is ultimately neutral regarding real economic output. The math eventually balances. But to reach that equilibrium, the real economy must endure 8 to 12 production cycles of structural friction. Zooming out from aggregate data reveals the individual welfare cost of this transition. The first recipients of the deficit spending injection, the savers in this specific model, gain a distinct advantage. They hold the new money before prices have adjusted, allowing them to buy real resources at cheaper rates. The flip side is a direct loss for everyone else. Later recipients and fixed income earners suffer the consequences of price increases before their own incomes rise to match the expanded money supply. Deficit spending does not act as a uniform rise in the economic water level that lifts all boats equally at the same time. The inflation it causes operates like a tidal wave. It reallocates labor, distorts production, and redistributes wealth long before the waters finally settle.